sacred harmony, where healing is felt, not forced, and transformation begins within. Today, we are joined by Becca Williams, a pioneering emotional therapist and plant medicine guide whose work is radically reshaping emotional recovery. Known for fusing ancient practices with modern neuroscience, Becca leads others through the deep work of emotional liberation using microdosing, cannabis assisted support, and powerful breath based methods to guide lasting healing. Let's explore how emotion, plant medicine, and sacred presence come together to create liberation. Welcome to the show, Becca. It's an honor to have you.
Well, Anya, it's really a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Mhm. So, Becca, what is emotional liberation at its core? And how is it distinct from traditional therapy or meditation?
Yeah. So, how I like to explain it is that I support people in identifying and understanding their reactive patterns that trigger intense emotions and then uncontrollable responses. And we look importantly at the specific triggers that set them off. So, in other words, I guide people through a process to diminish and eventually replace these reactions with feelings and behaviors that align with their highest intention. So, my method, as you pointed out, is unique in that it also prepares people for psychedelic sessions by grounding them in deep practical tools for emotional resilience and self inquiry and integration. And it helps individuals cultivate the inner clarity and psychological flexibility that's necessary to engage with, well, psychedelic experiences and just going out, regardless of whether it's psychedelic experience or just your regular normal unfolding out there, so that it's meaningful. It's in a meaningful, intentional way. So, rather than chasing an escape, my approach equips people to meet the unknown with openness and structure.
That's amazing.
Mhm.
And where does the body fit in the emotional release process?
Yeah. Well, we're looking at trauma, and trauma is all in how you experience events. So, trauma can be defined as a severe emotional response to a distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. And this can cause lasting psychological pain. So, what does that pain look like? Well, it can come in the form of what we look at in emotional liberation is seven different emotions, different difficult emotions. So, fear and anxiety is one, depression, anger, sadness, grief, neediness, self doubt, otherwise, we call it shame, and also guilt. So, in this work, I use a multidisciplinary approach that engages both the brain and Western science and the intuitive, which, of course, is not so much Western science based. In fact, quite the opposite. We pull it from esoteric Eastern uh, teachings.
Hmm. And so many methods aim to suppress or manage emotion. And this sounds like it frees it.
Yes, it freezes it once you learn how to how to respond to your emotions, and that takes sitting with them. So first of all, cognitively, Anya, we learn what the emotions are, so that we have had no education in emotions growing up, most of us. We often can't understand what we're feeling. It's usually kind of a word is stressed in Western language. That's nebulous. I'm stressed. Well, what does stress mean? So it's very important for us to learn, for the mind to learn what we're feeling and why we're feeling it. So in my work, in my coaching, and in my coursework, and in my retreats also, I teach people to feel what they're feeling so they can identify it, and then why they are feeling it. And so that's the most important piece, right at the top. So then once we have given the mind that information, we take ancient esoteric practices like Kundalini, and we move it all into the heart space, that deep inner knowing. So we're actually stirring up the trauma, the emotions that are tethered to the trauma, which reside in our body. We know that trauma resides in our body, in our tissues, in our nervous system. And so, how do we get it out? That's the important question. And this is the work that I do. So we stir that up through these various practices and move the emotions through. And it can be a very challenging thing. That's why we often don't want to do it, because bringing these emotions up just makes us shudder and it can be terrifying. But in this work that I offer, along with the plant medicine, as you said, microdosing cannabis, and we also microdose psilocybin, and that actually potentiates or amplifies the emotions that we want to work with, while keeping us in a relaxed state, so that we are able to bring these things up so that we can process them and release them.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And you're known for integrating psilocybin microdosing into your work. How does it enhance the emotional healing journey?
Yeah. So sometimes, and this is where the dimension of spirituality comes in, and it's not observed by Western science. So when we talk about trauma that is embedded in our physical bodies, spiritually speaking, it's also embedded in the emotional body, the energetic body, and it's very deep. It's very deep, oftentimes, depending on the person and the experiences they've had and what they're wrestling with. And so the psilocybin, as well as the cannabis, actually. So it's really what people want to work with. And I started out with cannabis microdosing, and then eventually moved into psilocybin, offering psilocybin microdosing as well, because I found that it goes a little deeper to really bring up those levels of deeply embedded trauma in the invisible bodies. And so that's where it comes in, and is very supportive and beneficial, we find, for doing this work. So where the work, emotional liberation, can be done without any outside substances at all. But in this, in our current world, it's hard for people to do this work, because they have these constant pounding thoughts a lot of the time. And so, what happens is the medicine is able to slow everything down and allow people to really focus on this work.
Mm-hmm, 100%. And what do you say to those who are curious but hesitant about plant medicine?
Yes, a person has to be comfortable with it. And that's why cannabis is such a great entry point, because there's a majority of states in the United States that offer, you can actually purchase cannabis, either mostly, medically or recreationally also. I hate that word. We call it adult use in the professional circles. recreational marijuana equals adult use marijuana. I don't like recreational. It sounds too much like about kids in a playground, you know. Um, so uh, people can try this without any outside substances first and see how it works. And if they're finding that they are not processing as effectively or efficiently as possible, then they can try a little cannabis. And the people who are a little have some reservations about it, CBD is a wonderful way to start. And as you know, CBD is a cannabinoid of cannabis, and it's the one that we call non-psychoactive. But actually, it relaxes the fight or flight response, so that it scales down any kind of anxiety or fear that a person has in doing this work. So it just softens everything and allows us to go in. So CBD is a good entry point. I have seen among clients and my students where they've started out with nothing and then they've moved into CBD, and then because we continue to talk and have conversations in the course group, and they're seeing others using the medicine and getting real results from it, then they're emboldened to start experimenting with it also. And I always tell everybody that life is an experiment, and you cannot fail when you see life as an experiment. If one way doesn't work, you just go a different direction the next time, and then the next time, until you actually find a sweet spot for this work. And that's what it's all about when I teach this work. And I just recently concluded a 7-week course, masterclass course with the Shift Network. And we had about 90 students in the course. So it's really lovely for people to be talking about their experiences, their victories, and maybe their disappointments in regard to the work, and how do we do this differently. And so I love that community aspect. And I really encourage that in my groups, because it's so powerful for people to come together and share their insights and experiences. I work one-on-one with people. And there's people who come to me and say, well, I don't like to be in a group. Well, of course, that's a whole conversation in and of itself, but it's not something that I broach right away, because people who are scared to be in social situations, if they're trying to avoid that, they're not going to. If they go into those social situations and they're fearful, it's going to be very hard to transcend that. So being able to work one-on-one and preparing people for maybe in the next 6 months, they might want to go into a group. It might actually call to them to do that.
Yeah, and when used in sacred framework, it becomes more than just a tool, it becomes a catalyst.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. It is a catalyst. I call it an amplifier. Um, and a catalyst means that it's setting something off. Now, a person may we draw from the Kundalini tradition, which is a very active and expressive movement. It is what's called a yoga, but it's really very far from the yoga that we know in the West. It's very active, and why I like that is because it's all about meditation. Everybody says everywhere you look, oh, you've got to do meditation, you have to meditate, you have to do this, you have to sit in silent mindfulness meditation. And that is not a good fit for a lot of people. People are running and it's just there's so much activity and energy being expressed, and then they're supposed to sit down and shut up and go inward. And that is very hard when you have these pounding thoughts on your head. So that's why this work is so helpful, where we bring in this multidisciplinary aspect with the practices, because they are active and they're very expressive. And so you can actually come running in and sit down and do this and just kind of go right into it. And then of course, if you want to use the plant medicine, that's going to even just focus you more. But on the catalyst, it can't, for people who are having a hard time doing it, it can be a catalyst. But also people who come in and do the work and say, you know what, I without plant medicine, they might say, I would like to go a little faster. I would like to experiment with the nothing is happening for me, and I'd like to experiment with the plant medicine. So that can be a catalyst, but definitely an amplifier in all respects.
Totally. And you mentioned that it's not just medicine, but the framework that matters the most. What makes your method so effective in combination with these tools?
Wow. Well, let me back up first and talk a little bit about yogic science and Western science. And I think it's important to differentiate between Western science and yogic science, since we draw from both. And when we think of science, we go directly to the intellect. Western science is about systems, usually using scientific instruments, repeated experiments and so forth, randomized, double blind, placebo controlled research. So when we say science, for Westerners, that's what most people think of. They're looking for that approach with specific kinds of data and instrumentation. But remember, that before there was ever Western science, the world relied on wisdom traditions. They didn't have science as we know it. They didn't have scientific instrument. The instrument was consciousness itself. And it was people, often yogis, using repeatable, systematic methodologies of inquiry from within. And when you look at the Hindus, the Vedic, the Buddhists, the Tibetan systems, all these systems have many similarities, because the truth is truth. And ultimately, we are our own scientist for our own life, for our own existence. And so using your own inquiry, and that's what I teach. I teach self-therapy. So using your own inquiry to probe into your own consciousness, your subconscious, your superconscious, is what I teach people how to do. So our assignment is to find and identify that voice within, that deep inner knowing within your subconscious. And these kinds of teachings can help us find and identify our inner voice, so that we can have a dialogue with our deep inner knowing and with our soul, if you will. Now, Western science often limits its exploration to the mechanics of how things function, steering clear of the realm of consciousness, right? Spirituality. So it provides detailed explanations of processes, but it stops short of exploring the deeper question of why. So, to fully engage with this inquiry, we need to venture into the domains of consciousness, the transpersonal, the metaphysical, the mystical. These areas hold the keys to understanding the underlying reasons behind our existence and the universe.
100%. But is there a danger when the framework is missing?
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. And the answer is I truly believe that as a clinician and as an emotions therapist, I see I see people doing substances to feel better. And I see this in the psychedelic community. I watch it closely because, of course, I embrace earth medicines, but I see a lot of people using psychedelics. For instance, I was at a festival a couple of weeks ago. I live in Portugal, and it was in central Portugal. It's called the Boom Festival, and it's a psytrance festival. Psytrance means psychedelic trance music. So people go to this festival, and there's all these stages where they're playing trance music. And the idea is that, and there's free flowing, well, free, you have to buy it, but free flowing drugs all over of, LSD and MDMA and ketamine and mushrooms. And people are uh, indulging in this day in and day out to be in this alternative, this subconsciousness, so that they can get into the trance beat of the music, and it's actually supposed to be very meditative. Now, it may be just and as well for just doing a spiritual retreat with psychedelics, if you will. And so what happens is, I have to digress here for a moment. So from modern neuroscience, we know that psychedelics reduce the activity in what's called the default mode network, the DMN. And this is a good thing. Overactivity of this system in the brain, the default mode network, it's often linked to conditions like depression and anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder, where repetitive negative thought loops and rumination are dominating. So psychedelics interrupt these loops and reduce the activity of the default mode network. If you follow me now, and this allows individuals to experience relief from their self talk, their self critical talk, or overly analytical thinking. And so it's thought to work differently with cannabis. So that's neuroplasticity, but we won't go down that road. But let's focus on the default mode network activity. So while they're in the midst of this, and maybe days, weeks, even some months after that, it's the default mode network has settled down, and people are able to um, feel free of the encumberment of difficult emotions. But as you point out, and asking me, well, is the container important? Yes, the container is absolutely vital and pivotal to permanent healing. Because when somebody does this psychedelic thing and they suppress the default mode network and then they feel better for a while, it's going to come back. Those feelings are going to come back. And so then they're on a track of doing psychedelic trips or journeys all the time to feel better. And that's not where we go. That's not what we want to do. We want to be able to use these as healing tools to add to our container of learning the emotions, understanding what we're feeling, why we're feeling it, doing the expressive practices to stir all that stuff up so that we can bring it up, percolate it up, and process it and release it. And that's not what's happening on psychedelic journeys. People are not getting closure, permanent closure on their trauma. And so there is a big difference, and it's a very important question that you ask.
And this integration seems to be what turns insight into transformation.
Yes, that's right. And it is integration, although the formal system right now is okay, so people do psychedelics and then they integrate. And what does that mean? They might journal or they might draw pictures or walk in nature. I mean, but I don't believe that works particularly well, quite frankly, Anya. What I do is I have people go through a 8-week course where they're learning their emotions. They're learning what's coming up for them. They're able to name, oh, that's shame. Oh my gosh, I feel so deficient around other people. I don't even feel like I have the ability to interact because I don't, I have such low self-esteem. And so what we do is we identify that in it before anybody's ever doing any kind of a psychedelic journey. Or even if they want to, they may not necessarily have to. I mean, I've worked with hundreds of people in courses where it's been a year-long course broken up into 8-week segments. And by the end of that, they're feeling great. They don't need to do anything further. But what we want to do beforehand is learn this the language of emotions that I call it, so we are able to have this emotional viability, and then if people want to, then an emotional resilience, I might say more accurately. And then if they want, they can go into a psychedelic journey. And and what happens is that they are equipped. First of all, they're more confident and they're equipped to go into this because they're in touch with what's going on internally. It's not doesn't come out as a great big surprise in a journey where they haven't had any preparation, if you will. And so they're able to surf the waves that come up through a psychedelic journey and land in a good spot. Now, this line, and you've probably heard it, that all how does it go? All journeys are good journeys. It's like somebody says, I had a bad trip. And they say, well, it was all journeys are good. You're going to learn something from it. I truly believe people don't need to have quote unquote bad trips. They can have very evocative and um, exploratory, productive journeys without having some god awful, horrific experience. That's my experience with people who I work with.
Definitely. So, Becca Williams reminds us that true healing doesn't mean numbing or bypassing. It means breathing into the pain and letting it move. Whether through sacred plants, science backed breathwork, or simply choosing to feel more fully, the path to emotional liberation is already inside us. So, if you're stuck in cycles that no longer serve you, maybe this is your invitation. It's time to liberate your emotions and meet your truest self on the other side.